Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
See your mind, Doctor. I see your universe.
And isn't the universe beautiful?
I see beauty.
Yes, that's good. That is good. Hold on to that.
I see endless, divine perfection.
Make it a part of you. Remember how you feel right now. Put it inside you and live by it.
I see into your soul, Doctor. I see beauty. I see divinity. I see hatred.
Hatred.
I see your hatred of the Daleks, and it is good.
No, you must see more than that. There must be more than that.
Death to the Daleks! Death to the Daleks! Death to the Daleks!
There must be more than that. There must be more than that, please.
Daleks are evil! Daleks must be exterminated!
You looked inside me and you saw hatred. That's no victory. Victory would have been a good Dalek.
To offer Klingons safe haven within Federation space is suicide. Klingons would become the alien trash of the galaxy. And if we dismantle the fleet, we'd be defenseless before an aggressive species with a foothold on our territory. The opportunity here is to bring them to their knees. Then we'll be in a far better position to dictate terms.
But you know how I feel about this. They're animals, Jim. There is an historic opportunity here. Don't believe them. Don't trust them. They are dying. Let them die.
I've never trusted Klingons. And I never will. I can never forgive them for the death of my boy. Seems to me our mission to escort the Chancellor of the Klingon High Council to a peace summit is problematic at best.
I offer a toast. The undiscovered country. The future.
I tried to tell you, but you would not listen.
Neither of us was hearing very well that night, Lieutenant. There were things I tried to tell you about having faith.
You have betrayed the Federation. All of you.
And what do you think you've been doing?
Saving Starfleet. Klingons cannot be trusted. Sir, you said so yourself. They killed your son. Did you not wish Gorkon dead? Let them die, you said. Did I misinterpret you? And you were right. They conspired with us to assassinate their own Chancellor. How trustworthy can they be?
Klingons and Federation members conspiring together.
Who is us?
Everyone who stands to lose from peace.
You said it yourself. It was logical. Peace is worth a few personal risks. You're a great one for logic. I'm a great one for rushing in where angels fear to tread. We're both extremists. Reality is probably somewhere in between. I couldn't get past the death of my son.
I was prejudiced by her accomplishments as a Vulcan.
Gorkon had to die before I understood how prejudiced I was.
What's happened? What's the meaning of all of this?
It's about the future, Madam Chancellor. Some people think the future means the end of history. Well, we haven't run out of history quite yet. Your father called the future the undiscovered country. People can be very frightened of change.
You've restored my father's faith.
And you've restored my son's.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you today and look forward to this time on the Undiscovered Country. Let them die. With these harsh words, the captain of the Enterprise, James Kirk, responds to the emphatic plea of his most trusted friend, the Vulcan Spock. The vitriol from this leader of the Federation may seem somewhat unexpected, but it fits within the larger narrative of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. The Klingons, a warrior species and the longtime nemesis for the United Federation of Planets in the original series, are now holding out an olive branch of peace. A major ecological disaster has crippled their ability to sustain their culture, their economic system is collapsing, and it may even result in their extinction. Some, like Admiral Cartwright, see this as an opportunity to eliminate the Klingon threat, or at least to exert the Federation's power over their longtime foes, to operate from a position of privilege and superiority, to dictate terms. Kirk himself has engaged in multiple battles against the Klingons over his years of service as a Starfleet captain. Most pointedly in the film Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, the Klingon crew of One Bird of Prey murder Kirk's son David, an action that Kirk cannot, will not, forgive. And now it is Kirk himself and the Enterprise crew who are being ordered to escort the Klingon Chancellor Gorgon to a peace conference with the intention of bringing the Klingons into the Federation and ending more than a century of hostility between the two enemies in the Star Trek timeline. En route, Gorgon is assassinated by elements within both the Klingon Empire and the Federation who have joined to conspire to resist this possibility of a different future with all of its risks and uncertainty. They fear the unknown, what it might mean, how their privileged status may be lost, and what else they might lose, how things will be different, because they certainly will be. Many will lose much as a result of peace. As Kirk later states somewhat obviously but explicitly, people can be very frightened of change. The known present, the maintenance of the status quo, is much safer, much more familiar, much more certain, much easier, and much too unjust. Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, essentially functions as the backstory, explaining why on the TV series Star Trek The Next Generation, there's a Klingon, Lieutenant Worf, serving as an officer in Starfleet on the bridge of the Enterprise itself. That television series began airing its 7-season run in 1987, with the Klingons having joined the Federation since the events of the original series. This film, Undiscovered Country, provides details for such dramatic change in Klingon-Federation relations. Released during the Next Generation era, this final movie with the original series crew recounting their culminating heroic mission was produced in 1991. As with other Star Trek series, the cultural context for its storyline is important. The original series aired from 1966 to 69 in the midst of the Cold War and the Civil Rights Movement. Many of its episodes deal directly with issues of war, nuclear war, democracy, totalitarianism, and racism, including a controversial scene in one episode that is commonly credited as the first televised interracial kiss. Star Trek also directly addressed the inclusion of the outsider, the marginalized, and even the enemy. It's no accident that among the bridge officers of the Enterprise in the 60s version are a Japanese man, a Russian man, and an African-American woman. This diversity among the Enterprise crew, who work together for the greater good, is celebrated and viewed as a normal reality in Star Trek's vision of the future. Continuing through its other incarnations of TV series and films, Star Trek has made many issues of social justice, inclusion, and respect for different worldviews as primary values in its universe. This then brings us to 1991 and the release of Star Trek VI. The Berlin Wall had just been torn down only 2 years earlier. Perestroika and glasnost were alive and well, and an improved relationship between Russia and the U.S. showed great promise. How should the good guys, us, respond to the enemy, the hated villain, the evil empire, now that there seems to be a chance for peace? In this setting, it is quite easy to see Star Trek VI functioning as a parallel or even an allegory in which the Klingons represent the Russians and the Federation the United States. What undiscovered country, what possible future might be possible for the world at that moment in 1991? Who would be willing to take the risk, that personal risk mentioned by Kirk, for the possibility of change, for the possibility of peace? Who would need to overcome their own fear, to name and determine to move beyond their own prejudice, whether a human, a Klingon, a Vulcan, or an American? And what about now, in 2021? While the world has certainly changed a lot in the 30 years since 1991, it also continues to have many of the same challenges. These same questions about fear, prejudice, and personal responsibility remain relevant in the midst of our tumultuous time, with so much possibility, but so much injustice, so much hatred, and so much fear. In the film, Gorkin calls the future the undiscovered country, lifting the phrase from Shakespeare's Hamlet. In the context of the Bard's play, the undiscovered country is death, or more properly, what happens after death, as it is unknown. But here the term has been recast as a metaphor for the unknown future, to what is possible but without certainty. Kirk reiterates this view of the future as an undiscovered country, one of possibility but uncertainty, now open to change, and taking action, taking personal risk, to see that such a future, a better future, may indeed be realized. Now, given my own research interests and publications, to my ears this sounds like the concept of utopia, to a good place, that is no place, but towards which humanity is constantly drawn. Oscar Wilde's famous statement from 1891 is often cited by those who work on utopias and utopian thinking. Quote, "A map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth looking at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing, and when humanity lands there, it looks out and seeing a better country, sets sail." I believe Wilde is correct. Utopia is always the goal, but never achieved. When we think we have arrived at the good place, our impulse is to something better, something grander, something beyond, something stretching our imagination. It finds an echo in the Apostle Paul's words in 1 Corinthians, "No eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the human heart conceived what God has prepared for those who love God." Our hope is that one day we will experience this type of existence, that this utopia will indeed become our reality. Whatever the nature of our eschatological hope, humanity's present reflects the tension between dystopia, the bad or worse place, and utopia, between our failures and our successes, between injustice and justice. We oppress, we hate, we are prejudiced, we marginalize and exploit. We create dystopia, but we also desire utopia. Of course, we do not all define utopia in the same way, the goal towards which we should all be striving and reaching out in hope. One person's utopia may be another's dystopia, and vice versa. As I often say in my classes at Bethany, you must always ask, utopia for whom? Dystopia for whom? As we move toward a definition and a destination that is never fixed, but constantly negotiated and renegotiated, we find ourselves asking, how do we get from here to there? By what process can we progress? Is it possible for humanity to move along a journey to such an undiscovered country that awaits those who will work toward it? And therein lies at least one vital factor: action and risk, whether personal or corporate or both. And I'll speak only for myself in this regard. I'm guilty. I'm guilty of not speaking, not acting, not being willing to risk for the benefit of others to see something of that undiscovered country become real. And there are times when I should have acted, should have spoken, should not have been silent, and thus I am complicit with a system of violence, allowing injustice to persist. And there are other times when I have said or acted in ways that perpetuate such a system, sins of omission and sins of commission for which I bear responsibility. Whether intentional or unconsciously, I contribute to the ongoing dystopia instead of working to discover that new land of which I think I can see a glimpse. Kirk's words, "Peace is worth a few personal risks," is a noble statement, but have I actually lived this way, or have I played it safe, preferring the status quo to the messiness and the struggle to bring about justice, and even when it is not to my own benefit or security? It would be too easy to remain paralyzed by such a weight, by such guilt, but we cannot remain gripped by our failures. We must do the hard work necessary to effect the change that we long to see, to participate in what is coming but is not yet, for a future that is better than our present. Kirk's acknowledgement of his own prejudice, his own arrogance, his own responsibility is a pivotal moment in the film in which he identifies what he must be accountable for and that he must change. Spock comes to a similar recognition of his own prejudice. Their mutual confession marks their transformation, that their self-awareness of one's own participation in the cycle that must be broken if an alternate future is to have a chance of becoming reality. Science fiction as a genre is particularly good, even designed to pose such alternatives, by allowing questions to be asked that otherwise may not, by challenging assumptions about how the world does and should work, by holding up something new and using it then as a mirror back on ourselves. Science fiction may include space travel, lasers, and robots, but it's really about being human. What the universe, our world, should and could look like, and how to get there, or the dangers or dystopias that arise if we do not work to change our present for the better. The other video clips near the beginning of our time this morning are warnings of dystopia that can all too easily be created. The lines from the Jedi Master Yoda in the first of the Star Wars prequels films, The Phantom Menace, have become something of an axiom. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Ultimately, Yoda unfortunately predicts actions by Anakin Skywalker, who becomes Darth Vader, turning to the dark side of the Force in his quest for power, and out of fear that his wife will die in childbirth, adding to his loss caused by the death of his mother. This fear that Anakin has of a possible future of loss and death leads him to anger with the Jedi Order, who he blames for holding him back from his potential, and that anger then becomes directed as hate towards his mentor Obi-Wan Kenobi. Out of these emotions and dispositions, Anakin Vader is responsible for causing immense suffering across the Star Wars universe in that galaxy far, far away. The other video clip comes from an episode of Doctor Who, Series 8. The exchange is between the 12th Doctor and a Dalek, the oldest enemy of the Doctor, from a species whose purpose is to exterminate any life that is not Dalek, for it is inherently inferior in the mind of the Dalek. By sharing his own memories with this particular Dalek, the Doctor attempts to convince the Dalek that there is something beautiful and good about life and the wonder of the universe. Perhaps a good Dalek is possible. At first, it seems to work, as the Dalek does experience some such transcendent things as mediated through the Doctor. However, the Dalek soon fixates on the Doctor's memories of hatred for the Daleks themselves, which it then labels as being good. The Doctor's horrified at this statement, desperately wanting the Dalek to see more. There must be more than that. But his hatred of the Daleks is so strong and so deep that it seems to define the Doctor in significant ways. His own prejudice towards the Daleks, his own hatred, stands in opposition to the person that the Doctor explicitly wants to be. His hatred will only breed more hatred. The Doctor will come to understand that he must change, leaving his prejudice and hatred behind him, something that will not be easy, but that is necessary. Turning from science fiction to biblical prophetic literature, the text from Isaiah 61 and cited by Jesus in Luke 4 is nothing short of utopian, depicting a new world, one radically transformed by the outpouring of God's Spirit on this prophet. This individual is to act in accordance with this mission of hope and restoration, using language common to the Jubilee celebration in the Torah, with the forgiveness of debts and the possibility of a different future for those who are marginalized and oppressed within Israel's economic system. The prophet is commissioned to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, release to the prisoners, proclaiming the year of God's favor, bringing judgment, comfort, and rejoicing for those who mourn. These are the righteous who will be planted as oaks, building up the ancient ruins. They will enjoy the wealth of nations. Their descendants will be known among the nations. Why? It is because they have followed the mission of proclaiming and acting in accordance with God's message of liberation and hope, both through word and deed. They have acted in ways that promote Jubilee values, bringing into existence such a vision. It is significant, of course, that this passage from Isaiah 61 is read by Jesus in his first sermon at the synagogue in his hometown of Nazareth in Luke 4. He proclaimed, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." The crowd at first responded positively. They were amazed at the gracious words coming from his mouth. Could it be true? Would they soon experience this utopian vision as reality? But their affirmation soon turned into a desire to kill him. Why? Jesus went on to say that this grand vision of the future would go beyond the Jews to include the Gentiles, those who were other, those who the people thought should be excluded from God's blessing. Rather, Jesus proclaimed that this Isaianic mission of bringing God's utopian vision was his own mission, and that it would reach expansively to include others. Now, this same crowd wanted to throw him off a cliff. Why? Because this undiscovered country was not just for them. This future would be something much more than that, and they were not willing to live into such a unknown reality and all that it would mean for them to do so. They responded out of fear, anger, hatred, refusing to name and to work beyond their own prejudice. They could not envision this undiscovered country, and they refused to join Jesus' journey to find it. In the midst of our complicated and chaotic circumstances, we cannot give in to fear. We must resist anger and hatred. We ourselves must name our prejudices and our discomfort with a ministry that calls us to the margins. We must act and speak faithfully in working against injustice, inequity, classism, racism, sexism, gender discrimination, and all forms of bigotry and oppression. We must be honest about ourselves and about how we often get in our own way of seeing this possible future become reality. Peace is worth a few personal risks. If we are to continue the long journey that awaits each one of us and all of us collectively, we must be aware that our destination, our future, is always in motion. We come to what we perceive as utopia, and then we must set out again for something better, never settling for the status quo. We might be quite surprised who also walks along the path to a better future, to an undiscovered country in a new world that is coming, where everyone is free, beyond our understanding, but for which we always hope and set sail, eventually reaching its shores and then setting out again to discover something more. May we live out the reality of this undiscovered country where there is justice and peace and God's presence in our personal and corporate lives. May it be so. Amen.